Hi there, this is Daniel Kremen, and I'm going to share with you my thoughts on what's shaping up to be, a really significant week for both Reform UK and the Conservatives. I think in terms of the direction that each party is going to go in and possibly their future prospects. So let's start with Reform. Monday saw the launch in London of a major new campaign by the party on the issue of law and order. And it's called Britain is Lawless. It's going to be a 6-week thematic campaign, and Sarah Pochen, our newly elected Reform MP in the north of England, she is a former magistrate. She's going to help sort of lead a lot of this activity. She and Nigel Farage were supported at the launch by Councillor Layla Cunningham, who is a former CPS senior level Crown prosecutor. She and Sarah spoke first, and then Nigel also provided a lot more of the detail on what Reform has in mind in policy terms for law and order. But let me just dwell a little bit on Layla, because I think she's a real talent for the future, and I think her involvement suggests that she's going to play quite a significant role for Reform going forward. Now, whether that means she ends up being the mayoral candidate in London, I don't know. But Layla's kind of involvement is significant, and she, has already kind of come to attention for being known as the vigilante mum, for somebody who kind of took the law into her own hands to try and track down those sort of street toughs who'd taken her children's mobile phone. She spoke really, passionately from the heart about that sort of rising sort of epidemic of knife crime and of theft and so forth. And I think it will connect with a lot of people. And that's not something that either that's exclusive to London. We've seen new, polling data out from Survation showing just how concerned the public are about criminality. So yeah, the three of them set out, what I thought was a pretty bold kind of agenda, and there'll be more detail coming and further policy announcements in the coming weeks. But what was on the bill? Well, they were talking about deporting some of the worst criminals abroad, including British criminals, to serve particularly life sentences overseas in places like El Salvador, which is it's not going to go down well around London dinner tables, but it's probably going to go down well in Kettering and in Workington and so forth, with a lot of people to hear that kind of thing. It's also really sort of putting this this into context, also talking about lower grade prison places, expanding the numbers, actually making sure that people who do shoplift, who are dealing drugs, go to prison. That this not no more of this £200 minimum threshold to face a charge, or even a community penalty. Getting back control. And Farage really talked about the Rudy Giuliani broken windows theory, that if you want to get hold of crime, if you want to bring criminality down, as they did in New York in the 80s and the 1990s, after a really difficult period, you have to sweat the small stuff. And that's where I think Reform is kind of tapping into the public mood. And stop and search was also really emphasised. There was an emphasis on hiring a shed load of new police officers, up to 30,000. But crucially, what Reform were talking about was introducing higher standards of physicality to be a police officer. Also a height requirement that hasn't been there for many, many years. So I think that is quite significant. They were also asked a number of other questions, but I thought it was very interesting that on one of them, Nigel was really sort of laying out that his direction is still the smaller state, and that prosperity is not built by the government spending more and more taxpayers' money propping up particular industries. So yeah, interesting times. And Nigel also spoke out this week about letting some of these water companies go bust, and the state can then strike deals with the private sector to take over a share each and manage some of these things. So interesting ideological kind of mixture going on there between wanting that smaller state and that larger private sector economy, but at the same time also seeing a role in the utilities, as we know, for the government to co-invest. Tuesday then saw for Reform the defection of a Welsh AM, Laura Ann Jones, I believe her name is, and she defected from the Tories. She's the first Welsh AM member in the Senate. And yeah, I think that is significant. I don't think she'll be the last to potentially join. And yeah, I think it's very encouraging. Reform has a real chance for next year. Interestingly, though, Farage was kind of intimating that they may not, again, actually appoint a leader before the elections in May. That is a bold decision if they do that. And I've said so on X a couple of times already. I hope that they revisit that. But yeah, moving on to the Conservatives, what can we say? Well, um, this reshuffle, I think, that Kemi Badenoch has embarked upon, it tells us two really important things. One is about the personnel dynamics, and one is about the political direction of the party. So, what's happened? Well, James Cleverly has returned. He was a leadership rival to Kemi, who then sat out along with another leadership rival, Tom Tugendhat, who's still on the backbenches, as far as I'm aware. But yeah, James, he has returned as Shadow Housing and Community Secretary. To be honest, that's a bit of a sidebar story, but interesting in the sense that, he is not on board with leaving things like the ECHR, and he's very much become the sort of darling of the Cameroon wing of the party. Very much the business as usual kind of guy. So that's interesting in and of itself, but it's secondary to what I want to talk about, which is absolutely the kind of tightening coil around the Kemi Premiership of Team Gove. This is the team around Michael Gove. And so who am I talking about here? Well, Neil O'Brien, who used to be a very much a ministerial sidekick of both Michael Gove and Matt Hancock. Now he's kind of reimagined himself as a bit of a champion, loved by the online right because he's talking tougher on immigration and on certain other issues now and culture. But this is very much a man of the centre for many years, and very much kind of Michael Gove's sort of natural side ally. And yeah, he during the pandemic he was really going after lockdown skeptics and trying to kind of get people cancelled effectively in public life. So that doesn't bode well, I think. Henry Newman, who was already in the team, has been promoted to be Kemi's chief of staff as leader of the opposition. He's replacing Ben Rowley, who was genuinely a friend of Kemi, who is departing, as I say, to the sort of the private sector. I'm not sure if that's his choice or if he's been shown the door, but yeah, Henry is a former Michael Gove special advisor, very close to Michael. And yeah, I think that is an interesting appointment. Again, he's very much in the sort of the centre to sort of left liberal wing of the Conservative Party, and very much sort of was very much part of Carrie Johnson's sort of social circle and set around Boris during those years. And yeah, the other kind of notable appointments there, Francis Maud, who is a former chairman to Lord Cameron when he was leader of the Conservative Party in opposition, and then he kind of went on to serve in cabinet. So Francis was responsible for the A list under Cameron, and we all know how that turned out. He's coming in as a senior advisor to the leader of the opposition and will be working on the reorganisation of CCHQ with Henry. That's interesting. And then you've also got another old chum of Michael Gove's, Bernard Jenkin. And people will remember Bernard because he was, the crucial sort of swing vote who buried Boris Johnson's career on the Privileges Committee by, voting against him, only for it to turn out that, Bernard Jenkin and his wife had been sort of partying themselves during lockdowns, despite condemning him for it. So Bernard, who's very much your archetypal sort of liberal left sort of Conservative MP in many respects, he's going to be vice chairman, I kid you not, vice chairman of the new committee for picking parliamentary candidates in the Conservative Party. So this idea that they're going to be going in a brave new direction of small c conservatism, and radical disruption, I think that's rather for the birds. I think this reshuffle has kind of basically confirmed that the Conservatives are increasingly going to try and hug the centre, take on, hold their line against the Liberal Democrats. They're chasing the Lib Dem vote to get that back from 2024. I think it's a sign that they're giving up under Kemi on really taking the fight to reform. I think that they feel that their space now is in the moderate centre right sort of space, and maybe play for 60 to 70 seats at most if they can. So a really significant shift there. But yeah, that's all for now. But it's only Wednesday, and there could be more developments to come this week. So keep an eye out. Cheers.